Joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio is Yoshikazu Kato, visiting scholar from Japan at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. From Beijing, Victor Gao, director of the China National Association of International Studies. And also with us is Sheila Smith, the author of Intimate Rivals, Japanese Domestic Politics and a Rising China. She's with us in the studio as well. Welcome to all of you. Sheila Smith, let's put this visit, and specifically that address to Congress, in some kind of context. I mean, here we have the leader of a country that was at war with the United States not so long ago, being welcomed now into the country.
That's right. You know, in the Asia-Pacific, we look at the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II as a largely Asia-Pacific story, but we forget that the origins of our relationship, they go back earlier than that, but we did end up at war with Japan in World War II. And so this was a very important moment, not only to talk about our contemporary agenda, but to reflect and to look back at that road from adversary to ally.
Victor Gao, how does China view Abe's visit to the United States and all those formalities that he was accorded, especially by the U.S. Congress?
Well, first of all, for the Americans, I would urge that when you are dealing with a Japanese politician, listening to what he says is just one thing. More importantly, you need to watch what they do. And the Americans should have learned the bitter lesson around the time of the Pearl Harbor bombing. And this is the same Shinzo Abe who has called the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the U.S. troops in the Second World War, aimed at defeating Japanese fascism, as the highest form against humanity. This was the Shinzo Abe who went to the annual ceremony to mark the nuclear bombing. And this is the same Shinzo Abe who denies the existence of the Manching massacre, and who denies even the existence of the sex slaves that the Japanese imperialists practiced during the Second World War. So I think the lawmakers in the United States should wake up and really ask themselves, is this the Shinzo Abe they should deal with? And what about, whether the Japanese politicians now are breathing about the new rise of Japanese fascism? So this is the danger that we are faced with in this part of the world. People in the northeastern part of Asia no longer want to see a rearmed Japan, a militarized Japan, a Japan on the rise of neo-fascism. This is the reality. The Americans do not want to acknowledge this. They probably are acting out of expedience, because Japan's ultimate goal is to deny that they are the aggressors in the Second World War, and they want to overturn the verdict imposed by the Allies who won the Second World War, and the United States was the leader in that battle. So I think, when you watch what Japan and Abe are doing, you should know better what they are up to.
Yoshikazu, do you want to respond to that? Is the United States acting out of expediency here, ignoring some of the realities of what happened in the past between these two countries?
Yeah, I think Abe's visit, generally speaking, the mood is good. And, President Obama provided a very good platform for Abe to speak, what he is thinking about now. But, as Victor Gao said, probably, some Asian countries and China, South Korea, they are not satisfied with what Abe said in the Congress, because, for example, no apology, right? Probably they need more, on words and action. So probably uncertainty will remain. And because this visit is not only happening in the United States, but happening in the world. So not only speaking to the White House, but how, he expressed to the world. Because
how is Japan looking at this visit?
I think, I'm looking at Japanese media. The response are basically good, because this is good for strengthening the Japan-U.S. alliance. So this is good for bilateral relationships. But in terms of Japanese whole foreign policy and how to take balance between domestic politics and foreign policy, we can looking at, a lot of protests are happening in Japan. Some, who want peace, right? Because the new guideline, between Japan and the United States, a lot of people are worrying about what's happening in the future. I mean, in terms of our security policies.
Right.
Exactly. So.
Well, Sheila, let's look at some of those changes that we are seeing during this visit. The United States and Japan have agreed to what's been described as the most sweeping changes to their bilateral security relationship. What are the provisions of this new security relationship?
Well, the guidelines for U.S.-Japan defense cooperation have been discussed for the last 18 months or so between the two governments, and they were announced by the Secretaries of State and Defense and Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Defense.
This is the so-called 2+2.
The 2+2 meeting that preceded Prime Minister Abe's arrival in Washington on Tuesday, and then they were reintroduced by the President and the Prime Minister during their meeting on Tuesday. I think we ought to be a little bit careful about the way we look at these guidelines. They're very transparent in many ways. They are not secret. Mr. Abe last July introduced this idea that he would relax some of the constraints on the military to allow them to work alongside U.S. forces. The U.S. and Japan have worked very carefully to talk about the new Northeast Asia, some of the concerns, proliferation from North Korea, some of the maritime dispute issues that have arisen with China. So there is some alliance concerns about this really rapidly changing security environment, and that's really the focal point. It's partly about deterrence, of course. That's what the alliance is about. But it's also partly about how to manage any accidents, miscalculations, incidents that could easily flare up between both countries. So I think you see that component in the conversation as well.
Right, Yoshikazu, I want to read to you something that the Chinese news agency Xinhua said about this new security pact between Japan and the United States. Xinhua said, Team America, world police now has a more loyal Japanese samurai to join the cast and meddle in global affairs.
Yeah, I think so. In terms of the trilateral relationship between Japan, China, and the United States, so for Shinzo Abe, not only political capital, like he said in Harvard University, probably he needs more to coordinating, in the future how to take balance between U.S., China, and Japan, because not only for foreign policy, but a lot of protests, a lot of oppositions, including opposition party and public opinion, they are opposing Shinzo Abe. So he is facing the consistency problem. What you said in DC and what you are going to say in Beijing and in Japan as well. So not only historical problem, but security issues, including self-defense and collective defense problems. Actually, this is historical moment, to achieve the new guideline. But, what could be happen in the future, how to convince your opposition in Japan and domestic public opinion. So I think independently, Abe's visit in Washington, D.C., this was successful. But, a lot of uncertainties, including historical issue and security issues, and even TPP issues. So in my understanding, the uncertainties will be increased in the future. So the real challenge will be coming very soon, I think.
Victor, how will Beijing respond to these new guidelines? Does it see it as a threat? And how does it fit in with the United States' so-called pivot to Asia?
What the United States and Japan are doing, first of all, it may be illegal according to the Japanese constitution. And the majority of the people, according to the most recent poll, actually are opposed to what Shinzo Abe agreed to do. So it may be illegal domestically in Japan. And I think from the Chinese perspective, we want peace, we want stability, we want to be friends with everyone. Therefore, we are not going to be frightened if Japan and the United States want to join hands together in preparing for a battle, an ultimate battle against China, because they will not win. Militarism against China will never win. That's the bottom line. Therefore, I think the United States and Japan can do better if they emphasize peace and stability in this part of the world, rather than doing anything stupid to stir up a militarization or arms race in this part of the world. Because ultimately, anyone who wants to use military forces to defeat the other side in this part of the world will defeat themselves.
Sheila, very quickly before we take a break, Japan's post-war constitution places strict limits on the raising of forces, on the use of force. Do these new provisions change that in any way?
No, they don't. And I think just to take issue with Professor Gao on 2 points, he talks about the return of Japanese fascism, which I think is also a little bit misconstruing what's going on in Japan. Japan is a democracy. It has a parliament, it has opposition parties, and it has a debate process. It has elections that voted Mr. Abe into office. There are a lot of questions inside Japan, not just about the guidelines, but also, as you said, about the Constitution and where Mr. Abe wants to take it. Those questions will be debated openly in the parliamentary forum, and I suspect they will constrain some of Mr. Abe's options. But I think we ought to be very careful here. Japan and China have begun again to talk Xi Jinping and Abe met last November. They've begun again to talk about stability in the region. I think the Abe government would like very much to move that conversation forward.
Right.
The two Coast Guards have met. Abe and Obama have met also on the sidelines of APEC. They have discussed ways in which to stabilize the military interactions in the Asia-Pacific and the maritime regime. So it is not that the guidelines are drumming up military to try to defeat China. Not in the least. What we want is a conversation on confidence building, on how to manage some of the misunderstandings and potential miscalculations on both sides in the Asia-Pacific. So it has to be both. It has to be a deep engagement with China, and it also has to be an alliance that feels reassured.
Yoshikazu, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I completely agree. We can work with China. So this alliance is not going to contain the rise of China, but we have to work together. So as Professor Smith said, actually, in domestic politics in Japan, a lot of people who want peace. So I do not think Japanese public opinion allow Abe to be more active on military strategy. I don't think so. Yeah.